we, children of God, attempt to find our way through this maze of experiences known as life, sometimes becoming lost and confused, one thing we must never forget is that God has a plan. Sometimes personal misfortune and tragedy overtake us, and circumstantial ill winds buffet us. When we have reversals in our careers, when sickness and disease attack our bodies, or when the death angel snatches a loved one from us, our faith is sometimes shaken, and we wonder why these things happen. However, in all this maze has to offer, let us never forget that God has a plan. Sometimes we earnestly and sincerely pray, and it seems as if our prayers have fallen on deaf ears. Our requests are either denied or the answer is delayed, and we feel frustrated and we feel forsaken. As we experience what can be the frustrations as well as the fruits of earnest prayer, we need to remember that God, whose pleasure it is to give the kingdom to God's children, does not frustrate us unless there is a reason. Therefore, when requests are denied and answers are delayed, let us remember that God has a plan. In life, it seems we often see the wicked prosper and the scoundrels enjoy peace. The matter of theodicy or the question of suffering and a good God, how do we match those two together, particularly the suffering of the righteous, coupled with the good fortune of the wicked, continues to be a very troubling and central issue for faith that affirms the holiness and justice of an all-powerful God. Why does God allow bad things to happen to good people? How long will wrong oppress right? How much more must the good suffer by the design and at the hand of evil? When is God going to move on behalf of the innocent, the oppressed, the victimized, and the meek, those whom God's word has said will inherit the earth? As we face what we consider to be the great injustices and contradictions of life, let us never forget that there is a divine timetable and a divine way of righting wrongs. Therefore, no matter what happens around us, no matter what we see, hear, read, or experience, let us remember that God has a plan. If anyone has questions or doubt, if anyone doubts whether God has a plan, I invite you to consider with me this morning the story of Joseph, which we read about in our first lesson from Genesis. And let me set the stage to get us to where we ended this morning. Once upon a time, in the land of Canaan, there lived a man by the name of Jacob, who had 12 sons. Among the 12 sons, there was one named Joseph, whom he loved more than all the others. Joseph was the child of Jacob's old age and was the first son given to him by his wife Rachel, whom he loved more than the others, Leah and any of the handmaidens who had also borne children for him. As a token of this affection, Jacob gave to Joseph a multicolored cloak. This caused Joseph's brothers to resent him and be jealous. Now Jacob was not denying his other sons anything in order to do something special for Joseph, for each of his sons had sufficient food and clothing and shelter for his needs. Neither was Joseph a threat to their places in Jacob's heart or the legacy he would leave. There was sufficient livestock and land and money to go around, and each son, by order of birth, had legal rights to his father's possessions. Yet the brothers resented the father's affection and gifts to Joseph. There's one thing that I've discovered. We can have our share of blessings and still be jealous of the blessings that God gives to another child of God. We can have our place in the kingdom and still be jealous of what we see being done for others. We can be blessed with talent sufficient for the jobs that we have been called to do and still be jealous when another seems to be multi-talented or multifaceted. We can know and testify to God's goodness and care for us and still be jealous and resentful when God seems to bless someone else with a little more or in a different way than God blesses us. To make matters worse, Joseph had a habit of dreaming these strange dreams and then telling the others about them. He had a dream in which he and his brothers were binding sheaves in the field, and his sheaf stood upright while the others bowed down to it. He also had another dream in which he saw the sun, the moon, and the stars bowing down to him. When Joseph told his brothers about his dreams, their resentment increased. Oh, beloved, one must be careful in sharing one's visions and dreams with others. Young people and old people alike, if you want to be something in life, if you want to go places and do things, you must be careful about those with whom you share visions and dreams. People who don't see visions or have dreams, persons whose main concern is protecting their turf and doing the same old things in the same old way, will not only not understand your dream, but will resent you for what they believe is the arrogance and impetuousness and foolishness of your dream. Jealousy and resentment are terrible diseases because they cause us to think, say, and do some terrible things. And so one day when his brothers were in the fields of Dothan watching over their flocks, Joseph went to them. When his brothers saw him coming from a long way off with his multicolored cloak, resentment began to build in their hearts. They said, "Here comes this dreamer. Come on, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we shall say that a wild animal has devoured him, and we shall see what will become of his dream." Reuben, one of the brothers, you are my brother, Reuben, but I'm not talking about you. Reuben objected to such a foul idea. So they decided not to kill Joseph themselves, but to throw him into one of the pits. Their plans changed again when they saw an Ishmaelite caravan and decided to sell Joseph into slavery. So then they spread animal blood on his cloak and took it to Jacob as evidence that a wild beast had killed his beloved son. They sold their brother into slavery and lied to their father. And let me pull over here and just say, I've never seen or heard of wrong being done without a lie being required to cover up that wrong. When Joseph's brothers sold him, they assumed that they had forever ridded themselves of his presence. However, they didn't know that God had a plan for Joseph's life. And in their act of treachery and deceit, God was laying the foundation for his fulfillment. Joseph, the object of his father's love and the victim of his brother's resentment. Joseph, whose only crime was being a dreamer in the midst of non-dreaming folk, was taken to Egypt, and there he was sold again. This time to Potiphar, a captain in the Egyptian army. But in accordance with God's plan, even Joseph's servitude was blessed. American black folk are proof positive that God will provide even in slavery.
Yes, Lord.
We are living witnesses that God can open doors and make ways out of no way, even in slavery. Joseph soon became manager of Potiphar's household. But the enemy will allow God's children only so much peace before he tries to disrupt their lives. Some of y'all were walking around last week minding your business. And the enemy found you. One day, Potiphar's wife approached Joseph with the desire, shall we say, to know him intimately. And when Joseph spurned her advances and Potiphar's wife was convinced that he would not acquiesce to her wishes, she told her husband that it was Joseph who had made the advances toward her and that it was she who had rejected them. Potiphar then threw Joseph into prison. Thus, a second time, Joseph found himself an innocent victim. The first time, his brother's jealousy and resentment had caused him to be sold into slavery. The second time, a woman's lust and resentment had placed him in prison. When Joseph was in prison, Potiphar's wife assumed that she had gotten even. She didn't know, however, that God had a plan for Joseph's life, and that God was using her treachery and her deceit to bring it to pass. Oh, I can just imagine that there were times during his journey from slavery to prison when Joseph must have asked, why? And for what? Perhaps Joseph didn't know that God had a plan for his life and that all things were working together for his good. Every setback he encountered, every pit that was dug, every trap that was laid, and every lie that was told was leading him to where God wanted him to be. While in prison, Joseph displayed the same leadership qualities he had displayed in Potiphar's house, and soon he became the head trustee. People can't keep one of God's children down. Try as they may, God's children will find a way to shine wherever they are. And so while in prison, Joseph met the chief butler and the chief baker of Pharaoh's household, and they had been locked up because they had done something to anger the Pharaoh. And one night they both had dreams that they didn't understand, and Joseph, having had experience with dreams from his childhood, was able to interpret their dreams. If God gives us a gift or talent, beloved, God will always open up a way for that talent to be used. Joseph's interpretation spelled restoration for the butler and death for the baker. Go back and read it. However, when the butler was restored to his position in concurrence with Joseph's interpretation, he forgot to tell Pharaoh about Joseph's case like he promised he would do. And let me pull over here one more time and say, people will forget about us once they have arrived. Once they have made use of what we have to give, once they have what they need for the moment, people will forget. But where people forget, God remembers. If we forget how we have made it, God has a way of making us remember. One night, 2 years later, Pharaoh had a dream that he didn't understand. And he dreamed that 7 fat cows were grazing by the Nile, when 7 thin cows came up out of the Nile River and devoured them. The thin cows, after eating the fat cows, were just as thin as they were before. I told 8 o'clock I'd leave that down. Then he saw 7 plump ears of grain growing on the same stalk, but another 7 ears of blighted grain sprang up and consumed the 7 plump ears. When the chief butler heard about Pharaoh's dream, he then remembered Joseph, the imprisoned Hebrew, who was a dreamer himself and seemed to have a special gift for the discernment of dreams. And when the butler told Pharaoh about Joseph, the king sent for him, and Joseph interpreted the dream. He said, the 7 fat cows and the 7 plump ears stand for 7 years of abundant harvest in the land. But these years of plenty will be followed by 7 years of famine, symbolized by the 7 lean cows and the 7 blighted ears. The time of famine will wipe out the 7 years of abundance. What is needed is someone to oversee the harvest so that grain can be set aside in the years of abundance for the time of famine. Pharaoh said, I perceive that you are wise and judicious and a person of integrity. I'm going to put you in charge of Operation Grain Save. And as such, you're going to have full authority. You'll be second in command in the whole land only to me. And Joseph did as he was commanded. And the 7 years of abundance were followed by the years of famine, just as he said would come to pass. Sometime during the 2nd year famine over in Canaan, and this is kind of where we pick up the story in our reading today, an old man by the name of Jacob, who had 11 sons at home then, went to the grain barrel one day and saw that the supply was running low, for the famine was widespread. And he told his sons, he said, take some money and go to Egypt, because I hear that they've got grain over there. And I can see Joseph in my imagination as he stood before the storehouse that day, overseeing the sale and distribution of grain, when he saw a caravan approaching him with some familiar faces. I imagine that Joseph could hardly believe his eyes. However, before Joseph had the opportunity to react, his brothers, not recognizing him, had bowed at his feet. And as they bowed, Joseph remembered his dream of the 11 sheaves and 11 stars bowing before him. If one is a child of God, beloved, one needn't worry about vengeance. For if we follow God's plan, if we only trust and obey, at a time and in a place where it's least expected, God will bring those who try to destroy us, those who laugh at us, those who mock us, those who persecute us, to our very feet. And so after he had questioned them and sent them back home, they returned, bringing their youngest brother Benjamin back to Egypt. Joseph invited them all to lunch. And after they had dined sufficiently, Joseph stood up and said, "Take a good look at me. Take a good look at me and tell me if you've ever seen me before." And I imagine that Reuben, the one who had concocted the scheme not to kill him but to send him off, probably started to raise his hand but quickly lowered it. You resemble, you remind me, but no, it just can't be. And I can see Joseph, when he could control his emotions no longer, break down in tears and tell them, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you plotted against and wanted to kill. I am the same Joseph whom you resented as a child. I'm the same Joseph whom you mocked for his dreams. I'm the same Joseph whom you lied to our father about. And I'm the same Joseph you lowered into the pit and sold into slavery. But do not grieve, for I bear you no ill will. You must answer to the God who preserved me in spite of that which you tried to do to me. For you see, God had a plan in my life. God allowed you to lower me into a pit and sell me into slavery many years ago that I might feed you at my table at this very moment. So it was not you who sent me here, but it was God who watched over me and preserved me by power divine and made me a ruler in the land of Egypt." Oh, and so I'm glad that God has a plan. Yes. I'm glad that God has a plan for all of our lives when we finish playing games with one another and on one another, when we finish our politics and schemes, our tricks and designs. I'm so glad that God has a plan for each and every one of us. And what always fascinates me about God's plan is that God is able to take the evil that people design for our undoing and downfall and turn it around so that it works for our good. Joseph later said to his brothers, "I'm almost done. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good." I'm so glad that God has a plan for our lives. For you know, Jesus came in accordance with God's plan. When Satan decided that he would hold humanity captive, God had a plan for our redemption. Wrapped up in love and grace and truth, God stepped across time and was born as a little baby in Bethlehem. He grew into a man who refused to compromise with wrong. And when Satan and the forces of evil decided that they would destroy him by subjecting him to the worst possible death they knew, death on the cross, Jesus declared that he would take that same cross that degraded others and use it as a pledge of our redemption. He said, "If I be lifted up from the earth, I'll draw all folk unto myself." The cross that evil used to shame a perfect Christ became God's plan and a pledge of our redemption. Oh, I like that old hymn that says, "Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long, while there are others living about us, never molested though in the wrong. Father alone will know all about it. Father alone will understand why. Cheer up, my brother. Live in the sunshine. Heal